Welcome to another episode of the Seven Laws podcast. My name is Michal Pur. I am a podcaster, and with me is a Professor Miroslav Barta, Egyptologist and the author of Theory of the Seven Laws. Hi, Mirek.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah. In the first episode, we try to give you an outline of what we are going to talk about. And this time we have the first specific topic, lack of leadership. The first thing that comes to my mind is the US election. And for you? Am I right?
Well, I think it's a wonderful example of leadership, or about the discourse about leadership. The last few days were quite turbulent, and even from Central Europe, everybody was able to follow basically hour by hour the actual happenings in DC and in the residence of I would dare to say, poor Joe Biden, who was pressed to the corner in order to offer the demise in terms of running for the second round of his presidency. So by all means, I think leadership is a very actual topic, and there are people that say we don't need leadership, or all we need, just organized groups of people with a clear vision and goal. But the point is, I never experienced a specific group of people with a vision. There's always somebody with a vision, with a leadership, or there is no one.
Yeah.
So leadership is
no
a crucial thing.
There is no one.
Well, I wouldn't put it this way, but
they call it a political proof.
Do you know what? When I was on my way here this morning, I remembered Winston Churchill, because that's a typical example of a leadership. You are also a very good historian, so you remember pretty well how was the political situation in the Great Britain prior to the World War II, and nobody was willing to take up the position of the prime minister. And then came Winston Churchill, and he was the only one in the political surrounding of the Great Britain at that time who said, "We are not going to capitulate. We are not going to sign anything. We will fight." And that was a typical lecture of leadership, because if you look at it from our perspective, you would say, okay, let's count the weaponry. Let's count the number of people assigned to the army. Let's count this and that. And then you would have to conclude without any problem saying, give up.
Actually, Winston Churchill was a great leader, definitely. But he lost the election after the World War II.
That's a very important thing,
yes, it is.
Aspect of leadership, because not always leadership becomes prominent and eminent. In times of prosperity, when economy is soaring, politics is working, there are no major conflicts all over the world, you don't basically need leadership. You need people that are basically able to maintain the status quo. But as soon as major problems appear on the horizon, there is imminent need of a leadership. And I think we are living in a world where leadership is badly needed.
Yeah. Regarding the Seven Laws theory, how would you define the effective political leadership? And can you give us some examples where current leaders are falling short of this definition?
I will use again Winston Churchill, and then one of the last books by Henry Kissinger. Let me start with a saying of Winston Churchill, who said, I quote, "The farther back you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." And this shows that Winston Churchill himself had history in high esteem. And he was, as we know from his writings, quite a solid historian as well. And maybe this was one of the cornerstones of his ability to lead and to see things that were still behind the horizon, especially during the 40s. And then it's Henry Kissinger. To me, he was one of the greatest geopoliticians of the 20th and early 21st century. And we discussed this some time ago, his last book that appeared also in Czech, Leadership, Six Studies in World Strategy. Maybe we might briefly remind the audience who was Henry Kissinger. He was a consummate diplomat and statesman who was dealing with different strategies all over the world, especially in the 1970s. And before he got into politics and the White House as a primary advisor to the president or Secretary of State, he received his PhD in Harvard. In this time, he was dealing with the 19th century Europe. His major question was, why was it so that there were decades of relative peace and sustainable development? And this study he was using all over his life to close important political deals when he was cornering Russia or Soviet Union at the time, opening door into China, etc. And one important lesson to take from his book is that geopolitics is not based only on big ideas and intentions and use of power, in most cases excessive use of power, but primarily and above all on personal relationships. And that's very important, especially in Europe, because we think how Europe is important politically, economically, which is a myth that is not valid anymore. And if you look at most important European politicians, most of them, there are maybe some exceptions, like in France or Great Britain, but most of them have no whatsoever ties, personal ties with other leaders or prominent figures in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And that's to me very important because you can't have reliable, effective international politics unless you have close ties with persons, with those
Definitely.
you close the contracts.
I think it could be very difficult to pick 6 stories from the current politicians, 6 leaders, if we would like to write a book about the leadership. So we would not, actually. But do you believe there has been a decline in the quality of leadership in last decades, I would say?
I think yes. I think you are perfectly right. I don't know exactly why is it so, but if you look at those 6 chapters in Kissinger's book, they are dedicated to 6 extraordinary leaders. They are Konrad Adenauer, German Chancellor Charles de Gaulle, French Minister Richard
one
Nixon.
thing, there's actually no one from the United States. I think so.
But it's actually, it's in a way logical because Kissinger was describing leaders with whom he was closing deals, and he was not closing deals with American leaders.
Yes.
He needed foreign leaders to be successful in international politics of the U.S. at the time. So I named them: Konrad Adenauer, Charles de Gaulle, Richard. Oh, there is Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon because of China. Because of China,
and it was Richard Nixon. Who basically assigned Kissinger to
my mistake.
Anwar Sadat, Lee Kuan Yew, and Margaret Thatcher. So I'm sure that most of our listeners remember these names. But if you were to say, if I ask you, name me a leader in the contemporary world,
it would be a tough question. Yeah.
Oh, the question
I
is
think
fine.
there is a
answer
decline
is difficult.
Maybe that's why we are not living in the challenging times.
That's one
last
thing.
30 years.
I think that what probably also matters is the role of social media. That now everybody has his voice, and it doesn't matter whether you have only feeling and you express yourself, or whether you've got arguments. Basically, today it's everything in one bag, and I think this is the negative impact on leadership. Nevertheless, I strongly believe that leadership will be badly needed in the years to come. Because if you look at the world now, I think the current state of the world is, to some extent, it's quite in vogue to blame the U.S. for everything, but it's not right. But still, the fact that we have local local crisis in South America, take Venezuela, in Suez, and the Houthis from Yemen, in the Strip
Africa,
of Gaza,
Sub-Saharan.
coup d'état in Africa, at least 6 or 7 of them during the past few years. Rising dominance of China in the far Middle East, and so on and so forth, is to me to some extent at least a consequence of the America who resigned on the role of global policeman.
Yeah, from my point of view, there is you already said that the rise of social media, but there is another thing which is important. It's a 24 hours news cycle. It's very difficult to dive deep in the topics in some agenda because everything's changing every minute. So it's impossible to get actually the feeling that there is someone with a vision because you can easily miss it. Yeah, that's my point of view. You agree?
Yeah, I fully agree. But still, I believe it's a temporary swing of the pendulum.
Really?
I hope. Yes, yes, I think so.
The
Because
fall of the Roman Empire is coming.
well, the difference is that nowadays we know what was happening in the past.
Yes.
Again and again and again in cycles. So we have good options to avoid it, or at least to minimize the impact of such a process. And that's why we also do this podcast. That's why I did the 7 Laws theory, because it's rooted deep in the history. But I think that the primary function of this theory is to be used not only for our presence to make us more sustainable, but above all to make our future bright and solid. And
There were many events because of the lack of leadership, which actually went to the collapse of, let's say, civilization. Actually, your friend Eric Klein, historian, wrote a book. It's 1177 before Christ, BC.
you like that, huh?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Highly recommend it. It's about the fall of the Egypt and Middle East empires, I would say, because of the attacks of the, let's call it, sea people. And the second event is the fall of the Roman Empire. Actually, I'm reading now a book from another historian, Tom Holland, which is called Pax. It means the peace of the Roman Empire. And it's about the rise and I would say the best episode of the Roman Empire. And it's only about the leadership, I would say, because there were great Caesars like Hadrian, like Trajan, and many others. And when they've run out of the leaders, they fell down.
Time is like a filter, and the deeper you go back in time, the better you can see.
But it's still the same from my point of view.
Yes, the better you can see who were the real leaders, who were the people that really had a serious impact on their time. And I also strongly believe that there won't be a big difference between us and the civilizations in the past. And history is replete with examples of inspirational leaders who have changed the world. And I think we will have some new coming again. Let me just remember from ancient statesmen like Solon and Pericles in ancient Greeks. They laid the foundation of our modern democracy. Up to modern visionaries like Steve Jobs, who revolutionized the way we interact with technology. And these leaders have, and that's very important, they have not only the ability to lead, but also inspire. If you want to be a leader, you must have an ability to inspire people with their visions and determination and left a lasting legacy. And by the way, and we talked about that some time ago as well, Jobs' presentation, which is still on YouTube, of the first iPhone, is a brilliant example of leadership in a crystalline period. And then my second comment would be about leadership as such, because people can ask, and what is it? How do I recognize leadership? How can I know that this one is a leader and this one is not? And it took me really a couple of years to find the best definition of leadership, and until I found it in Polynesia. To my surprise, there is an anthropological book dating from 1960s, produced by an anthropologist from the Chicago University, and he describes a Polynesian culture, which gives us a very interesting model of leadership that emphasizes 3 key characteristics. The first one is mana. If you want to be a leader, you must have a mana.
When you play a PC game, you know you know that very well.
It's not a biblical mana, but it's something you are born with. Either you have it or you don't have it, and you can't buy it. You can't learn it. And this is a so-called life force, which is often described as charisma or aura. Is the essence of a leader, is the energy that attracts and inspires others. You may imagine it as follows. You have a party. There are 60, 70 people, and people are coming in, well-dressed, coming from fitness, wonderful muscular bodies, and nobody notices them. And then comes somebody, 1 meter 60, 1 meter 65, dressed in a very casual way, not saying a word, standing in the corner. And everybody starts to notice somebody entered. And that's the mana. You can't buy it. Either you have it or you don't have it. And I'm sure you experienced that as well, that you were, in the party and then everybody was exaggerating. And
when my wife comes to the living room, actually, there is mana, definitely.
Wonderful example. And leaders with this mana are very often, basically always seen as a sources of wisdom and inspiration, who can unite. That's very important. They can unite, not divide, but unite and motivate others. Then there is the second aspect, which is our characteristics, which is tohunga. And this is characteristics that represents the knowledge. Tohunga.
Okay.
The knowledge, skills, and experience. So partially, again, you must be born with the talents for this. But at the same time, through tough work, you can acquire the hunger. And this is, again, necessary for effective leadership, because as a leader, you must show the people that you have some expertise in which you reached a master level. So that people respect you when you say, we have to do this. And if you yourself are capable of doing it, people will give you and pay respect. But otherwise,
who has more tahunga, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Let's get to this in another talk in this podcast. This tahunga includes not only technical knowledge, but also the ability to solve problems. Because if you want to show people that you want to lead them, you must also present them with problems that you've solved in the past. Make decisions, of course. You can't present yourself as a person that is not able to take serious real time decisions, and of course communicate with others. So these leaders are able to create strategies, organize people into teams and goals, and achieve goals. And then there is third quality, which they called in Polynesia toa. And this trait represents courage, decisiveness, and the ability to face challenges. And again, you must be born with it, but at the same time, you can, to some degree, acquire this skill. And There are fighters who are not afraid to stand up for their beliefs. That's very important because normal politician always listens to the polls, to the voice of the majority, etc. This is not leaders. This is politicians. But leaders very often go against the majority. They go against the polls and manage, after all, to turn them around and win them.
Yeah.
And that's the to me, most important ability
of
and
the
quality of a
politician,
leader as compared to a standard politician. And that's the leadership is so rare.
Actually, you said that you can acquire part of the skills. So what steps would you recommend to cultivate a better and more effective leadership in the political positions?
First of all, and this is something that we are losing in the population in general.
That there's a decline, definitely.
Determination and dedication to master something. If you want to excel in football, in soccer, you have to go to trainings for years. It's the same with baseball. It's the same with science. It's the same with bakers. It's the same with plumbers. So basically, you must show the determination and devotion. And this is, I'm sorry to say it, but my subjective feeling is that specifically this is being lost in our generation. So there is a small group of people that are still dedicated and doing everything to attain a mastery in their specific sort of activities. But most people, because we are living in such an opulent time, that people are not, pressed, to go into much pain to acquire something.
Without the leadership, I'm actually afraid that we are not able to solve things like climate change, like wars, as you already said, in Africa, in Asia, or Middle East. So without the leadership, and there is a lack of leadership. When you look at the data, there is actually distrust. Yeah, the politicians are losing trust, actually more than the politicians decades before. Yeah, like actually you talk about Richard Nixon, and when you look at his numbers, and when you look at the numbers of current politicians, actually he was better. That's the problem. That by all means, and that's the problem. Actually, he went to China and changed the world, and that I can't see no one now.
I don't have any.
So don't be depressed.
Answer to this, but
someone will come.
I remember a relatively recent example from Twitter. Oh, X. It's called X. Sorry,
it's X.
I'm old-fashioned, but I like to say Twitter. Yeah. Sorry to Elon Musk. And there was a post by Sven Lomborg.
Yes, the climate
famous,
change.
By the way, did you know that he spent like 8 years living in Prague?
Yes, actually.
I have no idea.
I've made 2 interviews with him. One was in Prague, actually. He worked for the Danish think tank, I can't remember the name. And he lived in Prague because he had a girlfriend here.
Oh, that's why. And then he moved to Sweden.
Yeah, and then he moved to Sweden, yeah.
So he compared data with a media impact. He took a cover from the Times with a title, with a heading, World on Fire. And then he looked up data from the last 20 years, and he said there has been a 25% drop in fires all over the world in the last 2 decades. So you have, a public, very fancy story, very catchy thing, world on fire. Everybody understands that. And then you have a graph showing a major drop in fires all over the world in the last 2 decades, but it's more complicated to read. So everybody pays attention to the cover of the Times and not to a figure presented by Lomborg. And this is one of the things that hugely impacts ability not to lead, but to make leadership catchy, important, and sexy again.
And he's actually not afraid to stand up against the majority.
That's why I appreciate him very much. I don't say I don't say he's right in every single
Yeah.
thing he presents, but he represents a relatively concentrated, integral approach to our modern world.
Sometimes he's criticized that he doesn't believe in there is a climate change happening, but that's not true. He actually accepts the theory of the climate change. So, but his last book, which is called, I think, Alarm something, yeah,
It was,
and you can find the story about the forest fires there, and it's database journalism, I would say. It's okay.
I have no problem with Lomborg in general. Of course, we can, pick up one or another statement or, paragraph from his book and be more critical, which is normal. Everyone makes mistakes, so everyone is not hitting always the 10, the black center. But on a general level, respect.
So, what's your vision for the future of the leadership?
I think all scenarios are open. All scenarios are open, and we just set the world on fire. And I think America is now on fire, and we will see how the Democrats and the Trumps will solve the future of this country. Quite often we hear that America is in a crisis, etc., and so on. But there is one huge exception that applies to to the U.S. as compared to the rest of the world. The U.S. has such a leadership. In general, the U.S. has such a group of wonderful universities, especially on the eastern coast. Then you have California, universities on the western coast. You have such a strong technological and military complex, business. And that sorts out American leadership from the rest of the world again. Because in our country, typically, leadership, when you say leadership, most people picture, if they picture anything at all, they picture a politician.
Yep.
In America, leadership are people, not only politicians, but politicians as well. But next to them, you have people from the Silicon Valley that are not afraid to be present in the politics. You have people from the business. You have people from the military. You have people from the universities. And this makes American leadership extremely, extremely strong, despite the current problems. So I strongly believe in the future of America as a leader that will retake the former positions, not only in their country but all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. And that's because the last century is called American century.
And
that's it.
Let me say one last thing, because most people
in Europe, actually, we hope it will last.
Yes, because everybody wants to go to the US. Everybody wants to study there. Everybody, likes American basketball, etc. And we could go on for hours with this. And that makes America so special. The inspiration. It's not Trump. It's not only Kamala Harris. It's not Joe Biden. But it's America as such. Yeah. And it's not about specific, country like, Virginia or Ohio or North Dakota or California, but it's America. And it's what it stands for. And leadership, the past leadership, is a very important part of this idea.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your support and stay with us. Bye.
You have a good day. Bye-bye. Bye.